I suspect that a lot of people have heard about the dog meat trade, maybe don't know the specifics, but you've probably heard about it in places like South Korea, China, Thailand, and Vietnam. But you may or may not have heard about the dog meat trade in Cambodia. So Four Paws operates stray animal care programs around the world. We have members of our Eastern European team here today. We run in Southeast Asia a partnership program in conjunction with local charities. So we have partnership programs that focus on stray animal care in Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand. Our program specifically in Cambodia is in conjunction with local charity Animal Rescue Cambodia. And it focuses in the capital city of Phnom Penh. So a city that has a population of around 1.5 million people. Our program there is focused on veterinary training in conjunction with the local veterinary school there. We do spay-neuter activities, and we're very focused on community engagement. But one of the issues that makes it very difficult to run these types of stray animal care programs is when animals are frequently disappearing or being stolen for meat consumption. And so it's difficult to justify the expense and the budget needed for spay-neuter programs when you know such a high percentage of these animals are ending up on someone's plate, essentially. And so we didn't really understand the extent of the dog meat trade in Cambodia. And we had heard a lot about it. We knew that animals were going missing. We would work at Buddhist pagodas and we would sterilize animals. We'd go back and they're gone. And so what we went ahead and did was a 6-month nationwide investigation using a local Khmer team to capture footage, to interview those that are involved in the trade. What's really interesting is that Cambodia is not as sensitive to they haven't had any international shaming campaigns, or they're very open about it. So that makes doing an investigation really interesting because they'll show you the slaughterhouses, they'll invite you in, very friendly, very welcoming. So it really provided us with a very unique opportunity to get some really incredible footage and hours upon hours of interviews as well with those involved and with pet owners as well. But what we found was extensive trafficking routes across the country, which we've documented, that connect these holding areas, frequently where dogs are being stolen, slaughterhouses, and certainly restaurants. In the city of Phnom Penh alone, we visited more than 110 restaurants, and the majority serving dog meat specifically, and the majority of these have opened in the last 2 years. We also we noted frequently, particularly when talking with women, that their physicians were recommending dog meat for its medicinal properties. We saw in terms of the slaughtering process, again, this is an illicit trade that has no regulation. So what we saw for the killing methods were pretty horrific. So the use of drowning pits are pretty specific to Cambodia, hanging and bludgeoning to kill the dogs. We also saw, what was interesting, the routine sale of dogs that were classified as naughty. So they were biting, whether or not they were biting because of behavioral reasons or they might have had rabies, unclear, but it is of concern in a country with no official national canine vaccination program for rabies. We know that Cambodia has one of the highest, per capita death rates from rabies in humans. And we also saw the routine sale of sick dogs, many of which were demonstrating neurologic signs. And so we collected all this information, but what we still needed to know was, what is the prevalence of dog meat consumption? What are the attitudes? If we're going to do something to try to address this, we have to have an accurate understanding of public perception and really the extent of the trade. Before we go into the details of the market research, I just wanted to paint you in 20 seconds kind of what the trade looks like. So oftentimes the dogs are caught by motorbike traffickers. They go around and often exchange dogs for pots and pans. So again, and you can kind of understand in a place where there's very little veterinary capacity, there's almost no spay-neuter, there's a constant birth of puppies. The puppies are killing, the dogs are killing chickens. People don't really want these dogs around. So there's frequent trading of these dogs. I mean, this looks like a semi-happy photo, but in most cases, the dogs are beaten over the head. They are lassoed around the neck and then put in these cages. And so they're then taken to these holding areas, and so there's a lot of these around Siem Reap, actually right down the street from Angkor Wat. There's a really big one. There are entire villages dedicated to this. And so once there are enough dogs to justify the transport to slaughterhouses, they're loaded into these retrofitted minivans. And these can hold, 100 dogs, 150 dogs, packed obviously in very inhumane conditions. Then the dogs arrive at pretty permanent slaughterhouses that are dedicated to just dogs. And then the dogs are drowned in these drowning pits. And there are, in a province right outside Phnom Penh, there are 3 of these within 10 minutes drive of each other, and they're drowning 100 to 150 dogs a day. So it is a massive industry. And what's interesting is, the restaurants in Phnom Penh, the majority are not killing the dogs themselves. They're getting the dogs from these suppliers, these wholesalers. And so it makes it interesting because when you interview the restaurant owners, they say, oh, I would never kill a dog. Like, I wouldn't do that if someone brought me a dog, because they're just getting them wholesale. So after the dogs are drowned, then they have to be defurred. So that usually happens with a knife, or they'll just rip the hair out. Or oftentimes they're blowtorched to remove the hair as well. And then they're prepared for the restaurant. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So why are we talking about this at a meeting like ICAM? And you might be thinking this is the last thing like I wanted to see today. I think as animal welfare advocates, we have a responsibility to discuss this in an open manner. As public health authorities, we have a responsibility to discuss this as well. I think for some reason, this topic is somewhat of an elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about. It makes people uncomfortable. Is this cultural? I don't know. I don't want to shame anybody. But what we do need to be open and transparent about are the animal welfare issues and the public health threat. And I can tell you, working on investigations now for several years throughout Southeast Asia, very rarely does someone say, oh yeah, I am involved in the dog meat trade because it's my culture. For the most part, it is a profit-driven industry where people are making money, selling dogs, and young men in particular, we'll get to this, they just like drinking with their buddies and eating dog meat. Very rarely do you see, yes, this is a traditional, I'm gonna go celebrate. It's simply not like that, and we'll talk about the results of the survey. So, kind of moving on, so we know that this involves millions of animals. In Vietnam, very high consumption, particularly in and around Hanoi, about 5 million dogs, we think, 1 million cats. We really feel strongly about the cats as well that are unspoken victims of a really equally brutal trade. But for the purpose of this survey, we're just gonna talk about dogs. In Cambodia, again, these numbers are very rough because it's completely unreported, it's unregulated. We think probably 2 to 3 million dogs. We know that there's a lot of international transport of dogs from Cambodia into Vietnam, which again is a public health issue because Vietnam is investing in rabies control. They're investing in dog vaccination, but yet you are bringing in 500,000 dogs from a highly rabies endemic country. And Indonesia, so 4Paws works in all of these countries with government stakeholders and in coalitions, and we're in a coalition with HSI as well, Dog Meat Free Indonesia. We think about 1 million dogs are being consumed there a year. The important thing to kind of recognize is that the majority of these dogs are stolen pets and stray animals as well. It undermines rabies control programs because we simply can't achieve herd immunity if the dogs are all being killed off. And it's also transporting dogs, again, some of these dogs are transported for days in these trucks from areas of high rabies endemicity to cities like Jakarta, for instance, that are so-and-so rabies-free. So it's a public health risk, probably not so much for the consumer when it comes to rabies, but it is for the people butchering the dogs that are aerosolizing nervous tissue, for the people catching the dogs that are at risk of getting bitten. And we know it causes societal unrest. If you do some cursory Google search on Vietnam dog meat, you will find numerous articles where pet owners are beating these dog thieves to death. There's a lot of vigilante justice going on because people are sick of having their pets stolen. And the good news about this is that Southeast Asia governments are already showing signs of wanting to end this trade. So this is not about an international NGO coming in and saying, you should eat this and you shouldn't eat this, and shame on you. Oh my God, 5 minutes. Okay, moving on. So now to get to the actual study. So what we wanted to know, we wanted to conduct a professional market research study that actually looked at what are the current levels of consumption, what are the barriers to stop people from eating dog meat, why do they consume it, and what can we do? We wanted to test different theories to see if people were sensitive to those theories. So we did an incidence study to look at the prevalence in Phnom Penh. Then we did a detailed usage and attitude study, and this involved consumers, 300 dog meat consumers. And when I say we, I mean, we hired a professional market research company to do this, but we worked in conjunction with them to develop the survey. And then we did focus groups. And focus groups are the most interesting because that's where you really get to hear open discussion. So when we look at dog meat consumption, we know that about 54% of the total population have eaten dog meat. That's pretty high. Like, that's certainly higher than we would have thought. And so about 72% of men have eaten dog meat and about 35% of females. We know that there is a lot of social stigma against women eating dog meat. As a whole, we can say that about 12% of the population are regular consumers. Regular consumer being defined as has eaten it in the last month and has eaten it at least 10 times in the past. But we do know this is a highly controversial issue, though, because 60% of people say, no way, I don't eat dog meat. And then we can divide it by males and females, and again, we can just say that, okay, there's a lot more men that are eating it than women. But what is interesting, though, is almost 50% of the restaurants that we went to were owned by women. And so I think that's just because women have a more traditional role in cooking, despite of what they are actually cooking. When we look at the journey to eating dog meat, the median age at which people start to eat it is 15 years of age. So people are starting really young, and a lot of times their buddies are recommending it. A lot of times they say they were tricked into eating it. They didn't know it was dog meat, but this tastes really good, so then they continue it. But when we look at for women in the pink on the far right there, women are far more likely to eat it to treat an ailment, and most of the time this is coming from the recommendation of a health practitioner. If we had to just profile what your average dog meat consumer looks like, he would be young, he's 18 to 29, he is a blue-collar worker. And what I did want to mention is we repeated the study in Vietnam as well recently, and there's some really interesting differences. In Vietnam, it's more of a white-collar worker. It's more of an expensive dish. But here we're seeing it is more of a lower income, lower education activity. Is dog meat becoming more popular? This is really hard to actually prove conclusively, but when we ask people, when we ask consumers, 62% said yes. You know, my friends are doing it, it's becoming more popular. When we ask the sellers of the restaurants, they are saying business is booming. 2 minutes, oh dear. Motivations for consumption. So this is an activity that people go out with their friends. Yep, they go out drinking, there's hard liquor involved, or it's done in the home as well. You know, women, you'll rarely see women going out. They will only eat it in the home and around people that they know. People say it tastes good, it's affordable, and it's becoming a cheaper alternative to beef. It's about half the price now. It's about 5,000 real, which is about $1.25 for a plate. And it's not a lot, like it's served to be shared. But we see, if you've ever been to Cambodia, you've seen Gansberg beer, it's everywhere. They have a fantastic marketing department. And you're seeing a lot of now dog meat being incorporated into their signs. And so it says in Khmer, it's a special meat, which is dog meat. The perceived benefits, it gives me energy, it makes me less drunk, a lot of people say, so that's why I drink it with alcohol. It warms my body during the cold season, the rainy season, and it has healing qualities. So a lot of doctors are prescribing it for scars, for pregnancy. Men think it makes them better in bed. When we look at patterns of consumption, this is not a late night activity, this is an after work. This is an after work, I get paid, and I go. The interesting perception, though, is that the majority of Cambodians say this is not Khmer culture. This is not traditional. This is from the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese brought this in during the occupation in the 1970s. Whether or not that's true, I'm not sure. But there's also, some agreement that it can bring bad luck. One person told us that her brother actually died after eating dog meat and drinking, and she attributes it to the dog meat. Bad luck, he shouldn't have done it, when in reality it was probably the drunk driving. But they really hold on to that, and very superstitious as well. A few testimonials here. From men, I'll just read out a couple of them. It gives me energy, I can play sport better, I'm typically incapable of one round of intercourse, but every time I have dog meat, doubles or triples. But women are more ashamed. I don't tell people, I'm embarrassed, people gossip about me, etc. What's interesting, and this differs from Vietnam, where 98% of dog meat consumers own a dog or have owned a dog. So there is definitely that disconnect, where in Vietnam, dog ownership is definitely more closely associated with not eating dog meat if you own a pet. What are their concerns? Like, do dog meat consumers have any concerns? Yeah, no, not a lot, no. They think it might make them too hot, and maybe it can bring me bad luck. Methods to deter consumption. So this is what we wanted to test. Like, is there any theories that would make people stop? Appeal to the consumer's empathy for animals. Yeah, that didn't really seem to be very effective in the focus groups. They know how these dogs are being killed. They might not agree with it, but it's not going to deter them from eating. To make the meat illegal, yep, some people said, yeah, if it was illegal and I knew I was going to be fined, I wouldn't do it. But the theory that was the most effective was saying that you could get sick from this. If you could get sick, and they said that the Ministry of Health could actually prove it, they would stop. But probably more effective than that would be to make it unpopular in their friendship group, because that's how people are starting, and they continue. And that's quite different. Okay, so here's the take-home point. So if you wanted to change behavior, it probably would behoove you to focus on these, the younger generation. You could reach them through social media. Their habits might be a bit less established. There's opportunity here to demonstrate the public health risk. That might make a difference. But because it is so prevalent and we really have our work cut out for us, it might be better to invest resources in creating a movement of people among pet owners who already aren't eating dog meat, and because there are so many of those and that feel very passionate about their pets and pet ownership. So we will be publishing all of this information. We're publishing the investigative findings in Cambodia. We'll be publishing the market research study in a month or two, and also the research in Vietnam. 4Paws is planning on launching an international campaign in October, focusing on Southeast Asia, where we're already working and have these government relationships. We are looking to provide support to governments that are already saying, look, this is not good for our tourism, it's not good for public health, and it's not good for animal welfare as well. A lot of local advocacy, PR with our local charity groups. We're setting a lengthy goal of 2030. We recognize that this is not a short-term initiative. But the future is bright. This is the last slide, I promise. The future is really bright. We're seeing growing pet ownership. We're seeing people speak out about it. We had actually our first government workshop. We presented these research findings, and government agencies were shocked, like really shocked. And I think that people don't know what's going on. And so we've been kind of drip feeding it, to make them aware, but I think when some of these reports come out, it will be interesting to see how that's received. We also, 4Paws has a really interesting MOU with a government agency called Cambodia Mine Action Center, and they use dogs for detecting undetonated landmines, which are a huge public health issue in Cambodia. We think between 4 and 6 million landmines are still active. And so they are really huge dog advocates. They use dogs for demining. And so they want to speak out and really lobby other political agencies against the dog meat trade. And just 4 days ago, just as an example, I mean, this is in Cambodia, this is Vietnam, but we see the Food Safety Management Board of Ho Chi Minh City urging residents to stop eating dog meat on the basis of public health. So we're already seeing this momentum, and it's really about lending that support so that they can actually put in policies in place. That's it.